everyone. Welcome to the newest episode of Zero to Funded. I'm joined today by Dryden, the co-founder and CEO of Intanify. They are actually making software that helps you detect what your company's worth for getting investment, which I think is really relevant for this podcast in general as well. But yeah, do you want to give us a bit of an intro, Dylan, and talk us through yourself and Intanify?
Cool. Well, Jack, thanks very much for having me. Great to be on your show. Intanify, I founded a little bit over a year ago, really on the basis that the current company in the modern world is 80 to 90, ready to 100% made up of intangible assets, 100% particularly for the listeners on your show. So intangible assets are things like data, like code, like brand, like IP. Whereas in the world that accounting standards were drawn up in, assets were plant, there were property, and there were equipment. So what that really means is that all of the assets of modern companies are not on balance sheets, and they're not really written down anywhere. Accountants really only believe an asset is something that they can kick, and they can write a serial number down, but that just doesn't exist anymore. So it seems to me that it's crazy that there's, call it $25 trillion worth of assets that are just not written down anyway. When you don't write things down, you don't manage them, you don't use them for financing, they're not, effectively articulated when you're raising money. And that seems to me to be a very large opportunity. My background was originally as an investment banker. I worked the City of London for Barclays Capital for Credit Suisse. A little bit later at a boutique co-founded by the former head of Europe for Morgan Stanley, and in between that, I've done a bunch of entrepreneurial stuff. I've probably been an entrepreneur for about half my career. So yes, that's kind of what we're doing, and we're very excited about.
Cool. Yeah, it sounds really interesting, to be fair. So what kind of took you from being an investment banker into entrepreneurship then? What kind of made you take that leap into running your own stuff?
Yeah, so there's kind of it's an interesting question. I worked as an investment bank for about 4 years, and then the global financial crisis happened. And I thought, being kind of young and arrogant and hubristic, that looking back on history, most of the really big fortunes have been made at times exactly like that. You think of the Great Depression, for example. So I kind of quit my job, which was a really great job, and I was getting promoted because I was young and cheap versus all the more expensive people that were getting fired, to start my own company, but really without an idea or a strategy or anything, which is not really the way to do it. I think, looking back and having done it again, you want to kind of really believe and build conviction in things before you kind of go ahead and do it. And there's a thread here that ties to kind of what I'm doing right now at Intanify. Is one of the first things I actually did at Credit Suisse. I worked in an evaluations group, and we used to capitalize the R&D expenditure of companies. And it was our view that if you're a company and you were spending money on R&D, then that needed to be viewed as an asset and an investment, and you needed to earn a return on it. You couldn't just slip it through the income statements and it looks like free profit kind of a little bit later. So those types of things were always kind of, at the back of my mind. So really the reason that this would be useful in Intanify to companies is because you can't very, very effectively raise money, certainly not with a very high chance of success and not at the most optimal valuation, unless you can really articulate the building blocks of the value of your company. And that's difficult to do when you just talk about kind of, visions and total addressable markets and, kind of business model type of slides. Companies really are made up of building blocks, and that's really no different to the land and property and equipment as it is today, where you have, very key bits of code and, very important piece of proprietary data, importance of brand and so on, things like that. So that then kind of goes forward to exit, where when you're selling your company again, you want to be able to articulate the bits that an acquirer is actually paying for, because they're not paying for your vision, they're not paying for the team at that point, they are paying for those kind of building blocks. So that's kind of always been at the back of my mind. And it was when when I made this realization and speaking to friends that are innovators that were frustrated that they were not getting, well, they were getting told, that's not an asset. And it made no sense to them. And of course, it does make no sense. So yeah, that's what led me back into the entrepreneurial world after getting back to banking for a while.
Nice, fair enough. So like you came up with this concept and realization that basically like companies were being undervalued and stuff, and that there was people missing out on investment opportunities and stuff like that, which is really good to be back, because like thinking about it, it does make a lot of sense. Like, but so how did you actually get from there to here then? Like, what's the story with the company so far? Like, how have you found actually getting to this point?
Yeah, it's considering it's not that long. I guess it's something like a bit under a year and a half. It feels like a very, very long time. So we actually on this realization that there was clearly a really big disconnect, and companies were suffering as a result. And we applied for a smart grant, which is hyper competitive, very low probability of success. And we took the view that, well, we're not going to kind of, be able to deploy money until we have something quite clear. But we'd speculatively apply for this, and if we won it, then we would kind of look into it a bit further. So we did win that smart grant, and built the strategy. What we looked at doing was, because none of these assets are written down, there's no data. And because there's no data, that's why, otherwise it would have been easy, it would have been done by now. There would have been 50 companies with machine learning models just kind of cranking out algorithms type of thing. But the only people who do know how to do this are, professionals like patent attorneys, like, consultants at big four kind of firms that actually go in and ask questions and understand things, and then write down something. It looks a lot like a balance sheet of another company, except kinds of things that are on there are software, code, IP, this type of thing. So we built a strategy around using a very old school part of AI that's not so fashionable, called symbolic AI, which is an expert system, which effectively models the knowledge of a human expert, through a huge multidimensional decision tree, effectively, if then that type of thing.
Okay.
We formed a partnership with an academic called Dr. Victor Dörfler, who's been doing this for 25 years. He's done it with like 17 Nobel laureates and a bunch of other kind of professionals, to take them into offices of major law firms, of valuation practitioners, and so on, and effectively download their knowledge so that it could be deployed at kind of zero marginal cost, massive scale, to help companies to self-serve to be able to generate this themselves. So we thought it was a really good strategy. It's a massive market, like 1.5 trillion TAM, which you don't generally see in investor presentations. But even with the smart grant, we found it really, really difficult to get traction with UK VCs, and we really did kind of knock down or kick down kind of every single door. And the way I got it done in the end was we won another Innovate UK grant, and this one kind of like a bit chunkier, about 400K. And we now reached the point that we actually had to get the money raised, or we're just going to lose kind of all the grants. Yeah. So I just called up former business partners, former backers, former colleagues from investment banks and other hedge funds, talk through the idea high level, and just said, trust me, back me, like this is a great thing. So I got the first, tranche of capital kind of raised that way. And then I did find one with VC, Q Ventures, which I guess how you kind of come across us that,
yeah.
Was really attuned to kind of the scale of the opportunity, and did believe in the idea. All other VCs, even at the really early stage, are very revenue focused and traction focused. In the UK and Europe, this is not the case in the US. In the US, you have a big market, you've got a good team, people will back you to deploy. But in the UK, it was kind of like, what's the revenue? And we were like, well, it's an idea. We obviously don't have revenue. And so that was kind of the gap we had. Q Ventures was the one VC that, did have the risk appetite and the vision to kind of follow us. So we got the capital in that way. So we've now got a bunch of high net worths that are kind of like Goldman prop traders, Citadel hedge fund managers, multinational kind of executives, and then this VC Q Ventures, who's great and now sits on our board and adds kind of a lot of value. As an aside to that, actually, it's kind of funny because now that we funded, I get 2 calls a week from VCs, which is such a law. So I get probably a little bit over half in the US actually, and we feel really good about the seed round next year, and we have developing really good relationships with big West Coast VCs and a really big one in New York as well, and kind of UK investors. But already in the conversations, you can see that the US investors are very focused on the size of the market, the use case, the team. I've built a really great team. I can talk about that a bit later. You can see the UK and the European investors are very focused on kind of revenue, and you can see they multiplying by like 5 to get to valuation. So when we get to seed next year, I foresee that we're going to be looking at 2 different kind of term sheets, and I can imagine it might be tricky not to go with kind of US money, which I guess is a well-worn story, but one that we're seeing kind of firsthand.
So why do you think that is, like, with regards to like VCs? Why do you think like UK investors and European investors and US investors are all looking for different things? Surely, like, if you're going to get a return on stuff like the requirements for that should be, or you'd expect them to be fairly similar. Why do you reckon it is that?
I actually have no idea. I mean, I guess the first thing to say, but whether it's a cause or correlation, I don't know, is the US venture capital market is orders of magnitude larger. So does that mean that they can take more bets? Or it got orders of magnitude larger because they were, taking risk and taking better risks. And you're not going to be investing in or building the next LinkedIn or these types of companies if you're only investing in early stage companies that have got like 200K of revenue. So I mean, the kind of conversation like what's your revenue going to be? And our revenue next year is not going to be large, and we're pre-revenue right now. We will be post-revenue certainly, well before then, but we're going to have a couple 100K of revenue. So you put that on 5 times. And that's going to be a valuation that's going to be interesting to us, particularly because our last valuation is already like 1.7 million. So, but US investors are kind of like, tell me about the market, tell me about the segmentation, tell me about the use cases, tell me about the competition, and then you work back from, well, it's a $1.5 trillion potential market. This is the piece you're going for, so on and so forth. Then they're pricing, more tied to that. And I guess if you look at the world that way, you're more likely to end up with the really big companies versus looking at small companies and seeing how they could be, 5 times bigger than they are when you started. So I don't know the reason. I think it is probably changing a little. And I think there's probably a little bit more risk appetite, seed kind of a little bit post-seed. But certainly at the early stage, it seems to be the same. That in the US, you can still get a couple $1 million, at pre-seed with nothing but an idea, and it seems to be very fun for that over here.
Nice, fair enough. So I guess like now you're at the stage where you've got this funding secured, like you've kind of like you've got that all sorted, like you put the effort in and got to this point now. What's the plan moving forwards then? Like how do you take the company to the next level now? Like what's your strategy and stuff?
Cool. So I mean, now it's after spending all that time spinning your wheels, you have to kind of like change your mind, the mind mode quite a lot. So I've had a really great team. So I brought in a co-founding CTO who was at Morgan Stanley 10 years. We're very lucky to have him. He's probably above our level, to be fair. He was most recently the CTO of a listed equity exchange, a regulated listed equity exchange. That's a large payments company. So him and I will be kind of like building things from here. We've also got hired a head of product, which I think is unusual for a company as early as us. I think that's because we've got this grant funding, and what we're doing is it's not a typical MVP type of thing. It's a lot of that. It's confusing and it's not necessarily intuitive. So if you've got a great head of product that effectively spends all of his time thinking about users and how complicated things are and how to make things simple, and what their assets do look like and how you communicate that better to them and so on. So and we've also got a head of IP that was most recently head of IP for an Oxford spin-out, and before that been of an AI, so he is, an IP guy, master's in IP. He was the head of IP for Metropolitan Police as well. So we've got, a really experienced team, I think, also for a company of our age. And yeah, now it's kind of all about building. So we've got a prototype, which we've kind of taken through one company, like manually, effectively, and had kind of like a really good result. And we're getting ready to kind of have a beta testable kind of prototype for about October. So we'll be selecting something like 10 or 15 companies that we'll work with, very closely and effectively be giving them a full service that wouldn't be the case when we have kind of products. So I'll be doing a lot of evaluation. Yeah. My colleague Marius will be kind of hand-holding them through that process. But then, ahead of summer next year, when we'll be getting ready to our runways to call it like October next year. Yeah. So coming up to summer next year, we want to have a product that's like attraction, showing some product market fit. Yeah, so be ready building kind of towards that. And that's what the whole team is really focused on. In the meantime, I mentioned we building these expert systems. So the first we built was one with an auditor, Maths Inspire Consulting. Does IP audits that go in a company, spend half a day with you and effectively come out with a report that tells you what you got, what the risks are, what the recommendations are. So we built one expert system with him, so that will actually allow a company to identify what they have. We built another one on valuation, which will go and apply the industry standard valuation methodologies, which frankly are really not that complicated. It's just it's in the interest of the industry to make it look like a dark art, and make feel that it's something that wouldn't be kind of achievable for most companies, but it's really not that complicated. So we deploy that. But in the meantime, we're building more expert systems, so we can piece them all together into a product that does a lot for companies. So I'll mention one of or a couple of interests we've done just very recently, which will be brought into the product a little bit after kind of October. The one is due diligence. When an acquirer one day, hopefully one of the FANGs wants to buy you, they will go and engage a really big law firm that will come in and kick the tires in your business and go through all of your contracts and so on. And then they go back. Part of that job is actually to come back with negotiation points, which is what they're going to come back to you and say, like, look, you didn't get X done, so we're going to have to take like 10% off the price, type of thing. So we've reverse engineered that. We worked with their person at this one of the world's largest law firms who does these due diligence exercises, and we understood that the way that they look at it, the judgments that they make, and we've now we'll be able to productize that to allow companies to day-to-day run their business in a way that there's no red flags, it's always optimal, which of course is just a good way to run your business kind of anyway. And that'll also have scores associated with it. You'll understand where the gaps are. You'll understand kind of what your direction of travel is, that type of thing. And another one with a leading patent attorney, which will allow. It's a myth in the UK that you can't patent software. It's just not true. I don't know where the myth came from. I haven't been kind of around it long enough, but in the US you can do it. In the UK, people believe you can't. It's not true at all. So we worked with a leading patent attorney that does software that's got a lot of successful cases to show kind of how it's done, which will allow companies to see what they could patent, how their development roadmap could be kind of changed in a certain way to take advantage of certain things. Because in the UK we have patent parks, right? So if you can get a patent, even if that's not necessarily key for the way you run your business, have it and make sure you can get some tax advantages as well. So yeah, we'll continue to do that, and the next expert systems we'll build will be kind of from user demand, effectively. So we'll see what companies need, what's useful to them, and then we're going to find the relevant experts to kind of work with to build the expert system, and then to plug that into our system to eventually build a suite of products, which will do everything to help intangible assets get properly identified, properly managed, properly valued, and properly exploited.
Nice. So yeah, that all sounds really good. To be fair, it sounds like you've got a lot on your plate, like over sort of like the next 12 months or so. But it sounds like you've got everything nicely planned out and know exactly what you're doing, which is always good. But yeah, so like I suppose like to finish us off then, like what would be like your one key piece of advice to anybody that's looking at actually going and getting some funding at the moment? Like they're at the stage where they've got this great idea and they want to take it to market and stuff, but they need that VC backing. Like what would you say to them to kind of yeah, like what are the hurdles and stuff that you've learned how to deal with?
Yeah, look, I mean, I can only speak from my experience. There's certainly kind of no wisdom I'm going to pretend to have, other than really good to try and get a grant. I think the UK government has done an incredible job with the smart grants and other kind of grant systems, and you can get a grant that does apply very well to what your idea is. That makes a huge difference, because it effectively means, call it something like 70% of the money you're going to spend is going to be non-dilutive capital, which kind of investors love. So that really does give a lot of help. I would say also take advantage of SCIS, which also helps a lot. I'm not necessarily sure we would have got it done without those two things. So do take advantage of those types of things. And then there's a lot of resources on the net and kind of otherwise, podcasts and so on, to make sure that you can really articulate your business idea well. There's a lot of not so good decks out there, and what you have to realize is investors, not only VCs but also kind of active angels, get thousands of these things.
Yeah.
And if you follow a template too closely, and you just have a problem, solution, market, this type of thing, even particularly you see a lot in the titles, it actually just says problem. Don't say problem, it's write out what the problem is, type of thing. So you really need to tell your story, and you need to articulate kind of what the idea is, and you need to stick out. And if you can't stick out, it's almost no point kind of trying. You do need to kind of have an interesting narrative, and then hopefully we'll be able to help as well. This works for pre-seed companies as well. I mean, one of the first pre-revenue companies. One of the first things we did was we did an intangible asset audit, but we don't have any yet. Now we probably do, but it's kind of like a projection of, well, these are the things we're going to have, because this is on our strategy, and we're going to have know-how how to do this. We're going to collect this kind of a data. We're going to build software that's going to have this key bit of proprietary bit that we're going to build ourselves. The rest we outsource, doesn't matter. Those are all intangible assets, and those literally will be the building blocks of how we're going to build our business, how we're going to build revenue, how we're going to make revenue, and what an acquirer is going to pay for in future. So I hope that we'll be able to help companies in future to be able to articulate these ideas a little bit more methodically than kind of fluffy charts and 2x2 kind of matrices.
Nice, perfect. Right, well, I think we'll call it there. But yeah, no, that's been really helpful, and yeah, you brought some great insight there. So thank you so much for your time. Sure, everybody else will appreciate it as well. But yeah, like we'll kind of we'll finish it there, and yeah, like the next episode of the podcast is going to be coming out in around a week or so. And yeah, like essentially hope to see you all in there as well. But yeah, once again, thank you so much for your time, Dylan. And yeah, have a good rest of your day.
Thanks for having me, Jack. All right, cheers.
Thank you. Cheers.